MP Dunkley, would you like your 20 minutes?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd
You're
like
right
the
ahead.
opportunity to speak tonight.
Yes.
I don't intend to be 20 minutes, but I will take this opportunity to deliver some comments that I think are pertinent for tonight. And let me start, as my honorable colleague, MP Cannonier, former Premier, started with congratulating a colleague from the other side, former Minister Keynes, on his passionate speech about the impacts of use of cannabis by the young people in our community. I couldn't say it any better. It's a subject that I have considered and talked about on numerous occasions, and I'm pleased to see now that the honorable member spoke from his heart, as he has done on regular occasions about it, and once again tried to galvanize our community, because families and individual lives are being put in a very difficult position and are being lost or being ruined because of it. And we as a community, the only ones who can stand up and make a difference. So I'm pleased to see that we've had a constructive conversation about that tonight, that my sole purpose is on touching on that subject is to support that. And I look for the opportunity to have this place used for some meaningful progress in dealing with that scourge that will continue to wreck our community unless we do something about it, Mr. Speaker. And as I told the honorable member when I spoke to him after he sat down from his presentation, I was in a chat earlier today with somebody about that specific subject and the health challenges that it caused to our young men. So congratulations, sir, on hitting a good line and length tonight. Mr. Speaker, a couple other points I'd like to speak on tonight. First off, the honorable member who just sat down prior to me speaking talked about, I believe it was the purveyors of no, Mr. Speaker. And I find it fascinating and quite interesting and concerning that the honorable member even admitted that he used to be in that camp and now has changed his tune somewhat. And I think that is solely because you've crossed from one side of the floor to the other. Quite often when you're in the opposition, you want to say no.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Point of order.
And now he uses my
point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order.
I think the honorable member is unintentionally misleading the House and making wrong accusations about myself. When I was aligned with him, spoke about fast ferries and made a good case as to how we could redeploy the money for fast ferries. I moved forward in years, and long before when I was even an independent, started to recognize the importance of fast ferries.
Okay.
And yes, so at that point in time.
Okay. Made your point.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He's making my point again for me, Mr. Speaker. But the politics of no. Mr. Speaker, let me shift and put it a different way. We needed a new airport. Even the former government had it in the plans for a new airport. We needed a new airport. Well, the politics of no got in the way. And Mr. Speaker, the politics of no got in the way. Why, Mr. Speaker? Because those who opposed it didn't support it as it was, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't mean they're against what you're trying to do. It means you don't support it in the current path that is intended to go, or the current path that's laid out. And here's the exact same thing we're facing with the Southampton Princess, Mr. Speaker. The honorable member went through a list of places that have closed, and it is indeed shocking that we're to this position, but we're in the exact same position with the Southampton Princess. I haven't come across one person that I've spoken to or anyone that I've read their comments or heard their comments on TV that is against some development at the hotel. It's just the scope of it and the way it's going to be done, Mr. Speaker. Now, I had no intention to speak to this matter tonight, but because it is a pressing national issue, I felt I must put that out there, Mr. Speaker, because I know my honorable colleague would intend to speak to it more, but I think it's important that we lay down the line of where we stand and why we stand in this position, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't think any of us need to go into detail about the importance of getting that hotel open. We've been through it. The unions have been through it. The government's been through it. The opposition's been through it. The people have been through it. That hotel now, potentially, is a lifeline for a better Bermuda. Because with it, with the opening of the hotel in the size that it was before, with the convention opportunities that we'll have, with all it was wrapped around before, and if it ever does come across as one of the best hotels in the world, it will allow Bermuda to be opened up again into a fantastic gateway. We will be able to capture the airlift that we so badly need. All of these challenges that politicians have talked about and the people in the street feel and certainly understand can be diminished to a great extent. So it's not the politics of no for no reason. It's the politics of your voice being heard to make sure that we can investigate better ways, Mr. Speaker. And I think one of the challenges with many people within the community is they just simply don't like an expanded SDO. That's simple, Mr. Speaker. Second challenge is, I think, with many in the community is, from the beginning of the hotel closure, I remember very clearly, the Honorable, I think at the time, the Honorable Zane De Silva was the Minister of Tourism, and late one afternoon here, he stood up to announce the purchase of the Fairmont Southampton with great joy and pride, and it was going to be redeveloped. That was probably in 2019, 2020. 2019. Thank you, Honorable former Minister of Finance. Now, almost 4 years later, it's still closed. And I highlight that point because the government, mainly led by the Honorable Premier who's away, celebrating, rightly so, the coronation of the King tomorrow, was led by the Honorable Premier with setting timelines and making promises that, and I'll be gracious here, very few have been met. Most people will say that none have been met. But Mr. Speaker, very few have been met. So here we stand on today, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, as many people will say, because it's Friday night. Many people will say that little has happened. In fact, we're probably in a more tenuous position over that development than we ever have before with recent events and comments by the spokesperson for the hotel recently. Comments that many people in the community took as threats, Mr. Speaker. And so it's not the politics of no, it's the understanding in the world that we live, and I reflected on it in the debate earlier today, Mr. Speaker. It's the understanding in the world that we live that communication is key. Transparency and accountability always have to be at the forefront. And we clearly have not seen that in this project. And so if we move forward, and this opposition, this loyal opposition want to move forward, we want that hotel to be open. We want the development to be successful. We want the investment in Bermuda. And a follow-up, we want to see airlines increase their routes to Bermuda. Here we are in June next month, Mr. Speaker, and Delta's only flying 3 times a week from Atlanta. My, what a fall we've taken. A fall we have taken, Mr. Speaker. And it's a rise that we all must take together. And so I make my points candidly because I don't want to hear it now because you have a different responsibility and you're in the government. You don't want to hear the politics of no. Get used to it. People have voices. People fought for freedom and the right of freedom of speech. And we don't try to shut them down. We listen to them. We try to find a way forward. And I believe Premier Burt and his colleagues have the ability to do that. We in the opposition, we support the development. We have our concerns. We're happy to work through those, Mr. Speaker. It's critical. We need to make sure investors to this country feel that they are heard, feel that their investment can take place, but also they need to understand the important things that are critical to us, because then more investment will flow into this country. So it's not the politics of no and objecting to anything on the table. It's simply the way it's done, Mr. Speaker. And that's important. Mr. Speaker, one other subject I'd like to speak about tonight is 2 subjects I have spoken about publicly recently in concern to health, safety, and security. And I'm speaking on the caveat that both Ministers of Health and Minister of National Security are not here tonight, but I'm sure they have their ears on, Mr. Speaker. I made it known in April when changes were made to how ambulances will run throughout the island that they had the potential to cause, Mr. Speaker, to cause reduced health and safety standards throughout the country. I had it confirmed by the chief of staff at the hospital that ambulances would not run from the east and the west stations regularly. They would be scaled back, and at nighttime, the only ambulances to run would be from the hospital. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want it on record in this House that after we've made improvements to get quicker emergency service to either ends of the island and all through the island, without the government even mentioning during the budget debate that there would be a pullback, it happens, Mr. Speaker. That is not acceptable. The lack of transparency and the potential for health and safety challenges, Mr. Speaker. I have had calls from people in the community that are aghast because they've seen it for themselves. One gentleman who lives up close to Somerset Bridge left to go to town a couple of weeks ago when the change first took place. And he was not a witness to an accident, but there was a person laying in the road when he went to town. When he came back sometime later, the ambulance still had not arrived. Simply unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. Now, I'm not here to continue to raise circumstances where we've had these challenges. I'm just here calling for an improvement in the emergency service that's required because we're heading into the busy season. We've got cruise ships that are going to be full up at dockyard. And the last thing we need for the East End or the West End is to have emergency service challenges, Mr. Speaker. A couple other salient points. The Bermuda Fire Rescue Service has more EMTs than any other organization, perhaps more than all the other organizations combined. Their service, the only thing that the Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service personnel can't do when they go out in a fire, the only thing they can't do is transport that person who would need to go to the hospital. Why are we limiting their ability to provide health and safety? I was given was because the resources had to be diverted to the airport. And I'm not going to argue that we're behind the eight ball there, but we need to do better because one of the first responsibilities that any community has is towards the health and safety of their people. We need to do better. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister of Labor said you just can't make stuff up, and that's why I speak for facts. Mr. Speaker, there's been a subject of waiting times in the emergency department for those who might need a bed after they've been admitted to the hospital. I've commented on this, Mr. Speaker, and I want to bring it to the People's House to talk about it briefly for a moment. It is simply unacceptable. It was a story in the paper about somebody who had to wait a significant period of time. I was called yet again last weekend by a family whose 75-year-old father was left in the emergency department for over 2 days waiting for a bed. This individual could not feed himself. At times, his food was just placed next to him, and there was no one there to help him. Now, I'm not blaming the staff of the emergency department. They are under tremendous pressure with the number of calls they have, Mr. Speaker. We've had the challenges of lack of capacity for whatever reason at the hospital. They could be short of beds, they could be short of staff, any of these issues, Mr. Speaker. But we must make sure that if we're operating a first-rate quality care hospital, which I believe by large standards we are, that we get people out of the emergency department and into beds as soon as possible. 2+ days wait, Mr. Speaker, is not acceptable. And so I call on the government to work with everyone to make sure that we can improve these two challenges that we have. And lastly, those two challenges within emergency care and the ability to transport people to that care. And the last point that I will make, Mr. Speaker, is I thank the Honorable Acting Premier tonight for sending a message of congratulations to the King, and I appreciate the sincerity which it was sent by the government of Bermuda. It was certainly supported by the opposition One Bermuda Alliance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Have a good evening and have a safe weekend.